Hi folks, my name is Barry Nelson. I'm a retired pilot from United. I've been retired 19 years now. And if you read this bio of Jim Davis, you say, my goodness, look at all these things he did and we didn't know about. And I'm betting nobody else in this room knows the story I'm going to tell, except maybe his immediate family, because Jim did not blow his own horn, did he?
No,
No.
Definitely not.
And he never said a bad word about anybody that I ever heard. Well, maybe a Democrat Congress. The way this came to be is my wife is a flight attendant. She's in Frankfurt, Germany today. She was flying Hawaii flying back in the old days in the 78. And I decided I would go on her trip. People say, what'd you do in the weekend? Well, I had breakfast in Hawaii. My daughter and I would just go over and have breakfast. Now, my daughter was also on this flight, but she wasn't born yet, okay? My wife was pregnant, sitting back at door 5 left, and I was riding in the cockpit, because it's hard to get to Hawaii, but if you go up in uniform and say to the crew, can I get a ride with you? They say, sure. So I was riding in the cockpit as a rider. I was not the flight engineer. The flight engineer was a reserve type person from Chicago, so we really didn't know him. But the captain was Scotty Devine, Jim Davis was the co-pilot, and I was riding. There are 2 riding seats in a 47, one behind the captain and one in the back corner. And I was sitting in the back corner reading. Nothing else to do on the way to Hawaii, right? You can look at the water, wow. Anyway, I was reading and we started our descent into Honolulu. And in those days, they were doing what they called a slow descent to try and save gas. Now, after this issue occurred, we found out things the next day. So I'll try to put it in perspective and tell you in chronological order what happened to this airplane. This airplane was tuned, as we call it, by a mechanic, and he trimmed engines 1, 2, and 4. And when you trim it, it's like tuning the carburetor in your car in the old days. You're giving your car a tune-up. They trimmed the engines, and he trimmed them. There's a range you can use. He trimmed it on the minimum range for fuel efficiency, all right? So they had started their descent, and I'm reading. Suddenly the engineer is up. He's looking at breakers. He's looking at stuff. What's wrong with number 3 engine? Da, 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 da. Well, something's going on. I'm going to watch. So I got up and sat behind the captain, Scotty Devine, and what was going on. And he had started to descend. At some point he decided to add a little power, and only number 3 came up. The rest stayed in idle. Only it did not appear that way to them. So the engineer was trying to find out what's wrong with number 3. The instruments are a blur. It's right up there, too high. So because Scotty was adding what he thought he needed to make the nice approach to Hawaii. So I started to listen to this. And I sat behind Scotty, and Scotty said, gentlemen, number 3 is running, yes or not? And Jim, as the co-pilot, and the engineer said, but Scotty, the exhaust gas temperatures are all the same, which is a good indication of power. If hot air is coming out the back end, there must be thrust, right? Well, that's a true statement in some respects, but there are other instruments that tell you things. But anyway, number 3 was an oddball in their mind, but not to Scotty. So I was listening to the conversation. And Scotty said, gentlemen, listen to me. The airplane is descending. I have the power up, and the airspeed is decreasing. And the airplane is trying to turn left. Now, I was a 37 co-pilot at the time. I don't know anything about a 747. But I am a mechanical engineer and a pilot, and I'll try to keep this technical stuff as low as I can and put it in layman terms for you. But I was sitting there and my thesis in college was compressor stalls of jet engines. And a bell went off in my head. Those 3 engines are stalled. Number 3 is running as fast as it can. And so I said to Scotty, not knowing this airplane, I said to Scotty, would you consider pulling back number 3? But they're all up there, all the throttle levers are up there. He said yes, and he pulled back number 3, and the airplane went, and it straightened out. Because they've been trying to turn left, because number 3, which is inside on the right side, is trying to turn the airplane, and he's fighting it. Now the airplane went, and straightened out, and he said, see? Now Jim and the flight engineer from Chicago came alive. And Jim's engineering background, his captain mentality, is he's always been a captain, just waiting for those old guys to retire and get out of his way. He's always been a captain. His captain mentality came alive. And they started to solve the problem. The first thing Jim did was call the Honolulu Tower and said, we're having a little engine, because number 3 instruments were way up there. And we would like to go straight in instead of going way around. If you've ever been to Hawaii, you go way out to the west and you come back and land to the east. We didn't have time for that. And the flight engineer called the purser, first flight attendant, said, we have a little engine problem. You should put everything away. The flight attendant said, we're all done. Everything is put away. Okay, that's done. So the tower said, you're clear to land on runway 9 right, which is normally you would come the other way. Now, I'm saying to myself, what is going on in this airplane? So when he pulled it back and the airplane straightened out, I said, now they're all in idle, even though the other throttles were up there. And that's when the other crew, ding, bells go off in their head, right? So Scotty said to me, we went through some clouds. We had turned off, we had put on some anti-icing for the engines and wings, or just for the engines. And what that does is it takes hot air off the compressor and puts it into the cowling and makes it hot. When you take that air off, it's not going through the engine. And because they were trying this slow descent procedure that United had come up with, when he put the throttles up, 3 of them would not go, okay? The 3 that the mechanic had tuned on the lean side. We didn't know that at the time. We found that out later. So Scotty said, we went through ice. Would you go? Because if you see clouds up in the sky, at minus 40 degrees, those are ice crystals. Those are not little water droplets you see up there. So they had put on their anti-ice for that. He said, would you go look at the inlets to see if they're full of ice or something? I said, sure. I went down, and I'm in uniform, so nobody pays much attention. I look out the window. Number 1, you could see it was turning. If you've ever been at an airport and you notice the little center of the engine has a white Nike thing painted on it, okay? When that's twirling in idle, the mechanic can see that. He knows that engine's running. You can't see the blades. You can't see them when they're still. You can't see them when they're running. But he can see the twirling, so he knows it's running. Number 1 was twirling. Number 2 was twirling. Number 3 was not twirling. It was a blur of power. It was all white. And number 4 was twirling. So I said, he was right. 1, 2, and 4 are in idle, and number 3 is running. What we call that at the airlines and any aviation is a hung start. Normally happens at the gate. You try to start the engine, and there's not enough airflow, there's too much fuel, and it tries to back pressure itself. And the engine will not pick up speed, and it's called the hung start. It normally happens right at the gate. You just shut it down, start all over again, because the computer figures all that out. The fuel controller reads the temperature of the air, the density of the air, and the dynamic pressure of the air that's coming in due to the speed of the airplane, and it figures out how much fuel to put in the engine. So you normally have a problem like this at the gate. It's rare, but nobody says hung start when you're in the airplane, in the air. So there was no ice. So Scotty's right. 1 engine is running. So as I went past the first flight attendant, I said, get ready for a quick and dirty we only have one running. She said, what do you mean we only have one running? So what they call quick and dirty for flight attendants is there's no preparation for crash landing. You just crash and you get all those people out within 90 seconds. That's called a quick and dirty. Otherwise, you would prepare the people, you would brief them all about this, that, or the other. You weren't gonna have time for that. So she pushed the all call, and at all flight attendant stations, you get 5 dings. 1 ding, 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 ding. That means, pick up the phone! And so she announced, get ready for quick and dirty. My wife is at door 5 left, pregnant, and saying, oh my goodness. So I went back up to the cockpit, and I looked, before I left, I had looked at the island. It seemed like a long ways away to me. I should have looked at the distant measuring device that would have said there was 15, I think it was 30 miles, and we were at 15,000 feet. An average is 3 to 1. If you multiply the 15 by 45, you could be 45 miles away at 15,000 feet. You're gonna make it. We were at 30, so we had it made, but not in my head at the moment when I looked, where is that island? So now the tower has cleared us to land. We didn't need any equipment. And Jim Davis is second captain at this point. He's not a first officer anymore. And we decided how they're gonna do this landing. And I went up to Scotty and I said, those engines are clear. Number 3 is a burst of power. Because it was right up, as far as he could push that throttle, it was up there. He put the other 3 back now because they're idle. What's the point of having the throttles up? You're just putting gas in there that won't burn. So now we gotta make the airport. So the tower had already cleared us to land on that runway. Scotty started to slow down. He took some flaps. He looked at the runway, said, okay, we're gonna make it, and called for the gear. Jim put the gear down. And then we were coming over there's an estuary right before the runway, the waterway that comes into Honolulu Beach. And as we were coming over that, the flight engineer had announced before that once he gets below 10,000 feet, he might have enough air to start the auxiliary power unit, which is in the tail of the airplane. It produces electricity and air on the ground so you can run things and have air conditioning. And it also is for engine start. So he said, I've got the APU running, I think I can start number 2. Scotty said, go ahead. He did all the things. Number 2 finally started to come back up as we were coming over the estuary. And he said, Scotty, I have number 2 running. And Scotty put up number 2, and sure enough, there was power. But now he was ready to land. So he said to Jim, full flap. And I looked at Jim's hand, and it didn't move. He was making his own decision of when they were going to take full flap. He's the co-captain here. And I thought later, he was right. Just make sure you've got the runway underneath you, and now you can take the full flap. So he took the full flap. Scotty Devine put the rest of the engine in idle, and we landed. Now, just prior to that, the slower you go, there's less air going in those engines that were in idle, but the fuel controller is still throwing in the fuel, and it's burning, and it's getting hot, and the exhaust gas temperatures are getting increasing. And as we were about a quarter mile, half a mile out, the engineer said, Scotty, 1 and 4 are getting hot. He said, Roger. I found out later why he said Roger. Number 1, 3, and 4 have hydraulic pumps on them, and they were producing hydraulic pressure for the airplane so he could fly it. And he was not going to shut them down. He needed the hydraulic pressure. So if they got hot, big deal. Anyway, as he took the power off and we landed, number 1 and 4 got so hot, the bell was going ding, ding, ding. In other words, not a fire, but just overheated engine. And Scotty didn't want to hear that because they were busy, right? He's landing, he's doing everything right. He said to the engineer, kill the valve. He pulled the breaker, and of course the ding ding stopped. Now we pull off and we taxi to the gate, and the flight attendants are relieved. No quick and dirty today. And now Scotty's got to call dispatch, right? This is what happened, really. Boeing engineers were on the next flight to Hawaii. San Francisco engineering test pilots and engineers were on the next flight to Hawaii. Pratt & Whitney had a representative in Honolulu, so he was already in the area. The next day, they all had a nice little meeting of what was going on. So we all went out to the bus to go to the hotel, and we waited for Scotty and Jim to show up, because they had to call dispatch and report all this. So when he got on the bus, Scotty said, well, okay, we're ready. And the flight attendant said, well, Scotty, we were ready. We knew that with only one engine running, you would have not enough reverse, and we might just slide off the end into the water. He said, no, ladies, we were trying to make it to the island, and they all collapsed on the bus. They hadn't thought about that part. Anyway, we all went out for dinner, of course, had a few drinks, and I don't know about Jim, but had iced tea. And we were discussing this with Scotty, and I said, Scotty, those engines were getting hot, and you didn't want them off. He said, no, that's producing my hydraulic pressure. I had to have those. I said, can a 747 go around, if you had to, from one engine? He said, yes, but not with the gear down. And when you take the gear up, all the hydraulic pressure goes to the gear, and you have nothing. So that's why he was leaving those outboard engines running for hydraulic pressure. In case he ever had to go around, he would have hydraulic pressure. So, of course, the next day, they removed those two engines, 1 and 4, for overheat, put new engines on them that Pratt & Whitney had shipped over, or somebody did, and the test pilots from San Fran Engineering flew the airplane back. No people. This airplane isn't going anywhere. So next day, you were mentioning 181.22. In those days, it was 181 and something else. We left around 1 o'clock, which was very nice to get up in the morning, because there's a 3-hour time difference, and so you're awake at 5, right? Go down to the beach, have breakfast, and then get ready for the trip. So we took off, same crew, same flight attendants, and we get up to 10,000 feet, and Scotty levels off. You're only allowed to go 250 knots below 10 because there's a lot of little airplanes around. So you can, after 10, you can start to speed up. But anyway, Scotty leveled at 10,000 feet and sat there, and then he pulled all the throttles off to idle. And the airplane sat there. And then he pushed all the throttles up, and away they went. And he said, now isn't that strange? Yesterday, the 3 wouldn't go up. And I said, Scotty, number 3 was an oddball. And Jim and Scotty turned to me and said, we don't want to know that. So that's my little story about what Jim did. He was playing captain, even though he was a co-pilot. That has to do with your rank and position, had nothing to do with your head. So Jim was very, I would say, part of the solution, because the captain makes decisions, but everybody else has an input. And Jim did a very good input. And he got an award, and I didn't get anything.
Oh.
Thank you very much, folks. It was nice to
Thank
meet
you.